use the chat. Use the chat for questions. Me and Gigi will keep an eye on that. And also, this meeting will be recorded, so yeah, that you are all aware of that. And without further ado, I will give the word to Nico.
Yes, thank you, Sterre. I hope you can all hear me. I seem to have some issues with my audio. Let me just welcome you again and say that I'm happy and also quite anxious to be honest about this session. Actually, I want to introduce the panelists of today, and maybe then go directly to Charlotte first of all, and then to the other panelists. And to inform you, I presented them and also myself and actually all of us with a certain dilemma, which I will share in a minute. And then the panelists will reflect on the dilemma, and we can also reflect on it together, perhaps during this meeting in the chat, and if there is time during the Q&A at the end of the session. And if we can't manage to do it all within this short session, there definitely is room to engage in further dialogue, including the people in this room, and also with others, on how we can work together to achieve what is in the dilemma, actually impartial inclusion of everyone. So this is my introduction. I'm passionate about the topic. I'm passionate about building bridges. I also know that it is difficult, but I want to give you the floor now, Charlotte, and maybe to you and also to Nina and Abu, the other panelists. When you start speaking, please can you mention your name, and also if you represent an organization, the name of your organization. But maybe first over to you, Charlotte.
Yeah, Nico, thanks. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I want to thank Bartos and Dorcas, you, Nico, in particular, for this invitation. It's a really interesting topic. You told us, Nico, you are passionate about this topic. It's also for me the same, so great to be here. Before I start telling about the project, a short introduction of myself. I'm working for Prisma, and it's an umbrella organization of more than 20 Christian organizations working in the development cooperation sector. And on behalf of our member organizations, at Prisma, I highlight the important role of religious actors play in working towards sustainable development. And why? In practice, we see the huge sustainable and positive effect of religion for development. It motivates people to reconcile. For example, religious actors often play an essential role in post-conflict reconciliation. And faith actors and faith-based organizations are well able to reach into society at its most local level. They play a unique role in building the resilience of individuals and their communities. And we also see that faith leaders and faith-based organizations hold a high degree of trust and influence their communities. They often support the most vulnerable to access government services and support the local government to understand the needs of the community. As I mentioned, they are also present in hard access regions where no other networks are present, including insecure areas. We saw that also during the COVID pandemic. A lot of faith leaders were working to promote hygiene measures, and they are really work local, so they could reach a lot of people. And we as Prisma see that working with faith-based actors is very important, but in the work we are doing, we are also confronted with religious illiteracy, which is the lack of basic knowledge about religion and religious backgrounds, with all their negative consequences, because religion and development aid are inextricably linked. Maybe you know the saying, religion is something personal for behind your own front door. But then you ignore the existential aspect of it. And a metaphor to make it clear, you all know the difference between a memory stick and an operating system of a computer. A memory stick you can just plug in and out, and that doesn't apply to the operating system, which is the most important software that runs on a computer. And religion, faith, is the core from which people live and act. It's the same as the operating system. It influences the way people see themselves, each other, and the world around them. So you can't leave that aspect at home. Therefore, it is essential to take religion into account in working towards sustainable development. Moreover, more than 80% of world's population sees themselves as religious. What we also see is that the prevailing image in most secular countries, such as the Netherlands, is that religion imposes oppressive rules on people and stimulates intolerance and violence. Sometimes that turns out to be the case. However, as mentioned before, religion can also have huge sustainable and positive effects. And this was the starting point of the research we did together with our member organizations, Word and Daad, World Vision, Tearfund, and Dorcas. And the research was conducted by the broker, and Ninja, who is also attending this meeting, was one of the main researchers of this project. And great to have you also in this session. And the main goals of the project we did together was to unlock evidence about the importance of working with faith-based actors, to get insight in present obstacles, advantages, and opportunities, and identify knowledge gaps on both sides, religious and secular. And the project was divided into different phases. First phase was a desk study, followed by 3 case studies. And after the desk and case studies, the broker conducted a document with recommendations for open dialogue. And it's nice to mention that this document is also used by the Ministry and Special Envoy on Freedom of Religion and Belief. There are a lot of results, but I will highlight some interesting conclusions. And if you are interested, I recommend to dive into the big research report. It's important to reflect on your own position and preconceptions operating in the development sector. We all have a worldview. Critical self-reflection is a vital precondition for engaging in the open dialogue that forms the start of a partnership. Another conclusion was an open and honest dialogue is essential for meaningful collaboration. Sometimes it's difficult, but you have to try to understand and to be aware of your own perspective and to willing to understand the other. Faith-based organizations can contribute to religious and context-specific programming, work toward improving and mainstreaming religious literacy and sensitivity within your organization and across projects is very important. To build this knowledge, engaging with religious actors, learning about them is an obvious first step. And there are many more interesting conclusions, and hopefully it triggers you to read the report and also make room for conversation about religion and working with religious actors in your own organizations. And also nice to mention a nice detail. One of the researchers of the broker, the colleague of Ninja, wrote after this project a nice scientific essay called A Bridge Over Troubled Water, how worldview helps overcome the religious secular divide in development cooperation and beyond. And this essay argues that this divide, both within the development sector and beyond, can bridge more effectively by understanding religion in terms of worldviews, as everyone holds a certain worldview. So I think this is it for now. I will give the floor to Nico, I guess.
Yeah, that's correct. So thank you for the introduction. I think that there will be something like a digital goodie bag after this meeting where we will share the report and the dialogue document, and maybe also a link to the article that Charlotte mentioned. So that will happen. And now the dilemma, with which I put to the next two panelists. So to Nenya, you can start in a second, and then Abu, you can follow. So the dilemma I presented to them is, how can organizations with a clear faith-based or other identity be impartial and inclusive? Maybe, so that's, I will also stick to the question that I originally asked, not make any additions at this point. That's the first question. And the second question, which is part of the dilemma I asked, is how can we build bridges between organizations with different identities to achieve impartial inclusion of all? So two questions that I asked you, Nenya, and also to you, Abu. Maybe, Nenya, you can start with your reflection on the questions and the dilemma.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Nico, and thanks, Bartos and the organizers for having me. I think it's quite funny how the second question kind of answers the first question. How can we be impartial and inclusive? How can different organizations be impartial and inclusive? By building bridges, which is the part of the second question, is how do we build these bridges? But to start with the first question, I think what's the most important thing to mention at the moment is that faith-based organizations are not homogenous. They are really varied. There's very different approaches to their faith, how they express their faith in their work, etc. And neither are non-faith-based organizations or secular organizations. They are also not completely impartial and inclusive. As Charlotte also mentioned, we all have our own worldview. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And by having these certain worldviews or faith-based identities, it doesn't mean that you exclude other identities or religions than your own. There are many really good examples of how, for example, Christian organizations work with Muslim organizations and the other way around. The thing that I think can happen is that as a Christian organization, your network might generally be more faith-based. So it's not to say that organizations exclude other faiths, but it's easier. So I think that is something to be aware of when you work in international development. But the way to overcome this is answering the second question, is to build these bridges. I think if you build bridges between organizations with different worldviews and identities, you can manage to include a wider variety of stakeholders. And this is also for me, when I was doing the research for the broker, is that I stepped out of my bubble and I got in touch with all these faith-based organizations, and I had never really realized what role faith plays in stakeholders' lives all over the world. So for me, that was a big realization. And also in conversation with people, I noticed that language was very important, that sometimes the faith-based organizations would use terms that I am not familiar with. But when you actually think about it, if you actually go into dialogue and build these bridges, you might find out that you're actually saying the same thing, but you're using different words. And I think that's very important in building these bridges, that you are open to this dialogue and you learn each other's language. Then I think maybe how to build these bridges. Other than that, the openness is needed and the willingness and the respect is there to go into conversation with each other. There are also some really practical benefits that you can state for indeed working with faith-based organizations. I think if other secular organizations were more aware of the network and the extent of the network that many faith-based organizations have, they'd be very willing to work with faith-based organizations to reach hard-to-reach communities that they may not usually reach. In many countries, every small village has a church. So I think it's very valuable to tap into that network. But of course, there are many other benefits of working with faith-based organizations. Not in the least, and then I'll stop talking. We did a case study on I think it was a Tear Fund program, who worked with faith leaders, local faith leaders, on gender equality by going through Holy Scriptures and talking about how they could interpret this. Now, I think that is something that a secular organization would find more difficult to do, and also to understand the local context. So I think in summary is to be open to talk to each other and to learn each other's language, which will stimulate a wider inclusivity, and make clear the benefits of working together and make a concrete business case. I think that is one of the big things. So thanks, and hand back to Nico, I think, before we go to Abu.
Yeah. First, the transition is through me. I'm not going to respond to you. You can all respond in the chat. So put your comments there, ask your questions there, and Sterre and Gigi will look at them and make sure that they get appropriate attention. But I want to give the floor to Abu, which I'm happy that you are also able to join us. And for you, you have the same dilemma, the two same questions. So please share us your reflection.
Thank you very much, Nico. I think the topic is quite broad, if I have to be honest, and there are so many dilemmas within that, and also in terms of the conceptualization of it as well. But what I would try and do is to try and simplify it in three ways. I'm glad that Lacey touched upon specific examples on collaboration and engagement between both faith-based organization and secular organization. So what I would try and do is first and foremost to try and provide my own perspective of how I view the dilemma. Then secondly, provide specific examples, and then talk about some of the principles, some of the guiding principles that underpins the relationship between both faith-based and secular organization, because we all work through the same lens and trying to achieve the same common goal. So from my perspective is that religious and secular views can both have significant impact on global development. As Lily said earlier, religious views can sometimes shape the cultural norms, our values, and also have impact on societal structures, which then influences everything from governance to welfare policies. And whereas from a secular view, it emphasizes on areas like science, human rights, guiding decisions on issues around healthcare, education, and economic empowerment. And when these two collide, because from a faith-based angle is driven by faith, whether you are a Christian organization or a Muslim organization or a Buddhist organization. And sometimes tension does arises when they clash, and particularly is where religious beliefs conflict with secular laws like human rights and principles. Examples includes debate and stands, around, for example, reproductive health and rights, LGBTQ plus and rights, and as well as freedom of expression, which we have seen in recent times, even with the ongoing encampment in the West. However, there is a way that both parties does harmonize and then foster a global good. We've had from Charlotte about the research that they've undertaken on how to ensure that there is a good relationship, and some of the outcomes that she talked about around sustainability and collaboration. So we do see that there is a greater goods when there is harmonization between both. And because many religious traditions advocate for compassion, justice, care for the marginalized communities, which also aligns with secular goals of promoting equality and social welfare. And one of the greater goods that I have seen is to have dialogue, have shared values, and also seek inclusive solutions that does respect both religious and secular perspective. And also we ultimately leverage the strengths of both religious and secular viewpoint. And as Lily mentioned earlier, it's also about trust. When you work with local religious groups, it's also about trust, and also the fact that it leads to a very much effective approaches in addressing global challenges. To build upon what she said earlier, it's that there are three categories on how we can build bridges. One is that there is intrafaith relationship, which is always between similar faith-based organization. There is interfaith relationship, which is between either a Muslim organization and a Christian organization. I can give specific examples later, and also a secular relationship, which we have seen between faith-based organization and mainstream organization, including UN agencies and statutory organizations. So these are the three levels, and regardless of which approach that you take, there are guiding principles that allows for this harmonization. One is the principles of do no harm, which means that you have to work with the group that is mostly affected, and also you have to consider the needs of the other group as well. And that is to ensure that there is community cohesion between both parties. Yes, there are instances where you have to decide whether it's going to be It's 80-20 rule or 70-30 rule in terms of your intervention on both sides, and that is where the argument about having equality plays in. But equality doesn't mean that you have to have an equal amount of intervention, but it means that you have to ensure that you don't just focus on one group and then ignore the other group. Then what you are what you are then doing is to fuel the ongoing conflict. The other is that is the red humanitarian principles, where you have to consider humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. These four principles are key, whether you're a faith-based organization or a secular organization. The issue around things around proportionality will always surface, in areas where there is a greater impact on one group than the other, and you have to ensure that you work with the government. And some of the challenges that you would face are sometimes government interference. In most of the countries of the South, these are the biggest challenges to humanitarian intervention, because the government would want to have a say on where impacts are. As a stakeholder, yes, because you have to engage at all levels, and especially those that are being affected. So these are areas where collaboration then comes into play. Whether you're a secular organization or a faith-based organization, is to then come together and work with local FBOs or CBOs. This then ties into the agenda of localization, which we have all been talking about now in the last 10 years, that we need to put our trust in local entities to be able to drive that change. And Leslie touched upon a point earlier that, Charlie touched upon earlier that faith-based organization does go to hard to reach areas because they take risk and because they are driven by their faith. Yes, that is true in most cases, because they always want to show that in regards to humanity, we are driven by faith to be able to support anyone that is in need, and then they go that extra mile. But there are ways that you can work with local organization to ensure there is empowerment, also to build trust, because trust is extremely important. And when you go to remote areas where it's a different ethnic group and faith identity, you have to establish trust. Otherwise, there will be an apprehension against the service that you are coming to provide. We have seen this in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, in Syria, in Yemen, even in Palestine. So you have to be able to establish trust, and sometimes you have to utilize local entities to build that trust. Underpinning this is also to be able to have cultural sensitivity, and also the respect of the culture of the custom and tradition in each entity and community. And in recent time, we have seen more collaboration and engagement between both faith-based organization and and secular organization to have greater impact, because research have shown that we cannot work in silos. By coming together, we have greater impact, and also to meet the needs of the people, we should underpin or define how we work and shape our intervention. So I'm just going to stop there because I think I've gone over 5 minutes, and then I can take any questions in the process.
Thank you very much, Abu. It's totally fine that you went, at least from my perspective, that you went over the 5 minutes. I found it really interesting what you shared. Thank you very much also to you. I am not going to ask you any questions, neither to you, Ninja, but maybe first I want to look at Sterre and Gigi if there are any comments that are directed to, well, to any of us that we could maybe answer. And also maybe I do have some concluding words, but when would be a good time? Because I also want to be mindful of the time commitment. So we do have the option to run out, but there's also an end time that we set. So where you are anytime actually, but where you at least are free to leave.
There are some interesting conversations going on in the chat. Not specific questions for the panelists directly, at least not that I have seen. But important, interesting to mention is that Tony mentioned that he's from a global interfaith network, and he agrees that the challenge is really hard to yeah, it's a challenge. Sorry, it's a challenging but worthwhile conversation to have to build bridges. But for example, for the LGBTQ plus community, it can be a complicated matter with interfaith conversations, and they told nothing about us without us. So yeah, maybe one of the panelists wants to elaborate on how to deal with interfaith conversations about really sensitive topics. Yeah, if you have some tips or takeaways about that.
Yeah, to be fair, I do agree with the point by Tony that these are very sensitive topics and also challenging context. But as humanitarian or as development practitioners, our faith should not define how we act. The ultimate goal is for us to support those in need. That is the main principle of being in this sector, is to support people regardless of their identity and regardless of their beliefs. So we should be driven by the values of helping people and ensuring that we are able to empower them to become sustainable. Yes, of course, there would be clashes with our belief, but that shouldn't be the driving force. The driving force should be the values and the principles of humanitarianism.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to say, yeah, completely agree. That should be the first and foremost driving force. And I think just to again, I think that some faith-based organizations have the unique ability to understand some of the struggles that communities might be having with the inclusion of LGBTQI community members, and that the religious sensitivity is key to finding a solution and to moving forward here, so that the interplay between faith and secular organizations, especially for these kind of difficult topics, is actually really important to move forward. And again, there's some really amazing examples of organizations working on gender equality, working on sexual and reproductive health rights with local faith-based leaders. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add there.
Yeah, thank you.
Perhaps we can invite you don't have to, but if Tony, if they want to elaborate a bit on that experience as well. As you've mentioned, you work as a network of faith-based organizations, also focusing on the context of on LGBTQI communities. I wonder how you've experienced to deal with these sensitivities in practice, and what are perhaps some of the lessons learned or tips you could give to some of the participants here that might challenge or grapple with this issue as well, or opportunity, depending on how you frame it.
I'm happy to, but I don't want to take up your space. But I'm happy to talk.
No, we would love to hear from you.
Okay. Jin Sogi is a global network of LGBTI people of faith, based in South Africa, and led from South Africa. And we have members in many parts of the world, mostly in global South contexts, who work at these intersections. I think for us, and this is what I was trying to say, one of the critical things is about making sure that the people who are affected by this marginalization or the lack of inclusion are also in the conversation. And then beyond that, to make sure that when you engage with faith-based actors, we've done a lot of work in Southern Africa, dialogue with religious leaders and dialogue between LGBTI people and religious leaders in various contexts. But to make sure that when you engage with faith-based actors, you're engaging with them as human beings and not as representatives of a particular faith tradition or denomination or, stream. Because what has happened often in the context that we work in is that the LGBT people come and they engage on a personal level, and they talk about their struggles and they talk about, their journeys. And nobody ever says to the faith leaders, well, you have a sexuality too, or you have a gender too. And what has your journey been about, been like in terms of those things? And so that when you move into that kind of conversation, that really shifts things. So that's just something to think about.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we're already at the end of this session. Thanks everyone for being here. Mostly the panelists for your valuable insights, and also Tony for that addition. It was really valuable. We will provide you with a recording of this session and with all the sources of the panelists that are mentioned. So you can look forward to see that. I don't know if Nico wants to say something additional.
No, yes, I want to say something. I really appreciate the contributions of all of us, the ones that I heard and saw to a certain extent. So thank you very much for that. And I wanted actually to leave us all with, that's how my mind works, with 3 words that all start with a T. The 3 words are tool. Hopefully And it is not the only tool out there. There are many tools that you can actually use to engage into a constructive, at personal level, even dialogue. But the dialogue guide written by the broker as a result of the research is one of the tools that we can use. So tool is the first T word. The second is trust and time. So I want to connect those two together. So when over time we engage in dialogue, that helps us to build trust, that helps us to come out of our silos, out of our bubbles. And I'm very aware that I'm very much in a bubble, and I want to get out of the bubble. It takes time to build trust, to build the bridge. And sometimes you see these bridges when you walk over them. Just by this sheer act of doing that alone, you also need trust. You can think of those really wacky bridges in various places in the world. And when you look at them, you think, well, I'm not quite so sure. But when you do put your trust in, when you take the risk and do trust and go to the other side, that's how we can meet at a personal level. And I think when we are able to meet each other personally, trust each other as human beings, it will also help us as organizations to cooperate, to understand each other, to build bridges for people who are in need, and staying true to humanitarian principles. So that's what I wanted to share. So trust, tool, and time.
Well, once again, thank you all for being here, and recap will be sent to you shortly.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Goodbye.
Right.